Hello students, this is module 5.3.2, Microbes 2. As you can see on the slide in front of you, we're going to be dealing with viruses. Viruses, of course, are one of the categories of microbes. Unlike the first two, which are both made of prokaryotic cells, viruses are acellular. If you look at the definition here of a virus, it is a non-cellular infectious particle that consists of DNA or RNA enclosed within a protein coat. These guys cannot move, they can't grow. They do have to be inside a host cell to replicate. They're obligate intracellular parasites. Maybe you should put that up there kind of with the definition. And you might add down below in your notes here, find a little space in the margin, and note that viruses are not considered to be alive. They're not alive because of the cell theory. They have no cells, and the cell is a unit of life. So without a cell, according to the cell theory, you cannot be alive. Although viruses do have some of the attributes of living things. Of course, most viruses, we know of them, they are not typically harmless, but they're attacking some cells, and so they're all parasites by definition. And so if we look at the definition of viral diseases, we can see this is just a sampling of some of them. Viral diseases include AIDS caused by HIV. This used to be considered a death sentence. This is a sexually transmitted virus. Of course, when certain high-profile celebrities like Magic Johnson contracted the HIV, contracted HIV, everyone thought he would die soon, but he's doing very well over 20 years after his initial diagnosis. Of course, he's very wealthy, but he just got very good medical care. He's doing fine. The second viral disease is called SARS. This is one that originated in Asia fairly recently. It was thought that it was going to be a global pandemic, but it turned out not to be nearly as severe as was feared it could have been. A respiratory virus of sorts. Number 3 is a very well-known virus. This is the flu. I don't know how many of you have never realized this, but the word influenza is where the flu comes from. And the symptoms, of course, can be very, very severe. Aches and gastrointestinal upset, vomiting and diarrhea, and it can be fatal. I mean, I know you feel like you're going to die if you have the flu, but many people have died from the flu, and we've had epidemics. Now, we have flu shots that are given every year, and the reason we have to get a new flu shot every year is because the virus evolves. It changes from year to year, and this is evolution in action. Failure to recognize this can cause people to be in trouble and in some cases to die. So it shows that evolution is far more than just a theoretical consideration, but it's a real important part of modern biomedical science. Number 4, herpes virus. There are multiple forms of these, and they cause like little lesions or sores, like cold sores are caused by some of the herpes simplex viruses. But there's also a genital herpes, which is sexually transmitted. So if you're sexually active, you should be aware of that possibility as well. Number 5 is measles. If I ask my class how many students have had measles, almost no one raises their hand, but I guess I'm old enough that I did have measles and mumps and many of those diseases. Number 6 is polio. Polio, of course, could kill people. It could also cause crippling effects, and is a very, very tough disease, which is really on the decline in a very strong way. Number 7, rabies. This is a virus which is carried largely by carnivorous mammals, and to be exposed to the rabies virus, if your brain is exposed to the rabies virus, typically you die. And the most likely carriers of rabies here include skunks, foxes, and bats. But any predatory animal could, in fact, be infected, including dogs and cats. And so we inoculate dogs, but I guess not cats, although we can also inoculate cats. but it's not required by law. Viral disease number 8 is mononucleosis, sometimes called the kissing disease, but this causes great fatigue, and it's not uncommon among high school kids to get this virus. Number 9, hepatitis. This is a severe virus which is making a comeback. Some of this is due to drug addicts and shared needles, but it is becoming a stronger and more resistant virus, and there are multiple forms of it. We're not going to pursue them. Number 10 is the common cold caused by a rhinovirus, and there's really very little we can do except alleviate the symptoms. Number 11 is smallpox. This was a very severe disease. It caused widespread death, but it's also a disease that modern science is pretty much driving into extinction. We are really slowing down smallpox. Occasionally there may be a case in Africa, but it's greatly diminished compared to what it once was. West Nile virus is kind of a recent virus. This is vectored by mosquitoes. It has reached Arizona, and so your best bet there is to be protected against the vector, the mosquito. Notice that treatment of viral diseases, we have drugs that are antiviral drugs that are specific for, it's not a general type as much as with antibiotics. Here these tend to be more specific. And of course, one of the problems is that viruses are developing evolved resistance to these drugs. Here's some pictures of some viruses. Here's a hepatitis B liver, so you get these kind of pustules on it. And here's a child that has a measles rash all over his torso there. So severe stuff. Now, we talk about viruses and virus friends. Here are the virus friends, viroids and prions. Viroids are simpler than viruses. Recall the virus has both a nucleic acid and a protein coat. Here, this is only nucleic acid, only RNA with no protein coat. And there's no protein coding genes either. And this little RNA, this little nucleic acid, can cause certain conditions. And there's not a whole lot of known viroids. They cause things like what is shown here, avocado sun blotch, not some really severe condition, but we don't completely understand viroids, nor do we completely understand prions. Prions are even simpler than viroids. These are infectious proteins. They don't have any nucleic acids, only proteins. And it is believed that they cause things like bovine spongiform encephalopathy, which is mad cow disease. The human form of that is VCJD, or variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and that's a horrible death. And what happens here is it causes a deterioration of the nervous system, including the brain, making the brain spongy, creating little holes in it. Of course, this causes a loss of neural function, can make a cow appear crazy. Here in the lower right, we can see this cow has lost motor control, so therefore it's a mad cow. Of course, this problem was prions was made much worse when some of the beef producers would take the cows, and when they died, they would grind them up and feed them to the other cows, thereby infecting them with mad cow disease. Prions, because they're not really alive, can't be really killed. We have to cause them to denature, be misshapen, but it's hard. They're resistant to boiling, baking, radiation, and disinfectants. And so this actually shows some of the proteins that we think they are. Now, if you have questions about how the life cycle for viroids and prions works, you're not alone. These are things that aren't completely understood. But nevertheless, the presence of viruses, viroids, and prions, they provide some evidence that self-replicating chemical systems are possible. None of these are cellular, so none of them are considered alive. They do seem somewhat intermediate between life and chemistry, but it's very critical that you recognize that no one believes that viruses, viroids, or prions are between non-life and and cells. These are all obligate cellular parasites, and so they're considered to not be on the lineage of cellular evolution. So something to kind of keep in mind, I guess. We have one last group of microbes that we're going to consider. We're not going to really consider the fungi at this time. So that would be the fifth group. So this is really the fourth group, and this is kingdom Protista. These organisms are all made of eukaryotic cells, and that's an important thing to recall. So kingdom Protista have eukaryotes, they have nuclei, and there are many, many lineages of protists, at least 30 different lineages. So that may mean as many as 30 different kingdoms, but this is an artificial grouping, kingdom Protista, but we are going to use it. So you should learn kingdom Protista, but understand that we're using it as a convenience to keep us from having to learn a bunch of other kingdoms. Now, the interesting thing about kingdom Protista is it was a time of evolutionary experimentation, and out of that great experimentation with eukaryotic lineages, three groups, now known as kingdoms, arose: kingdom fungi, kingdom plantae, and kingdom animalia. And so we have three groupings of protists that we're going to consider here. There are more lineages that we're certainly not going to look at, but the animal-like protists are the protozoans. The plant-like protists are the algae and the seaweeds, the kelps. The fungus-like protists, well, slime molds and water molds, but some of these are actually classified differently depending how we do it. If we look at the characteristics of kingdom Protista, they are eukaryotes. They have the membrane-bound nucleus and organelles. They typically have a cell membrane, and some have cell walls and some don't. Some of the classification, at least historically, has been based upon how these organisms move around, and so we call them locomotor organelles. Flagella are protein fibers that beat and cause locomotion. Typically, they're long and few in number. Cilia have a very similar structure to flagella, but cilia, unlike flagella, cilia are short and numerous. Pseudopodia are false feet. These are extensions of the cytoplasmic membrane, which are capable of moving and engulfing food. And then there are some protists that don't have any locomotor organelles. Many of them are parasitic. Some protists can encyst during rough conditions. A cyst is a dormant cell with resistant covering. Sometimes it can be a few cells. Nutrition here, they are photoautotrophs and heterotrophs, and the heterotrophs are both absorptive and ingestive types. Most protists are unicellular, some are colonial, and some of the big seaweeds and kelps are clearly multicellular. If you look at the pictures down here on the bottom, you can see that it's referring to those three lineages: the animal-like protists, the protozoans. Proto means first in protist, or in protein, or in protozoa means first animals. These are the animal-like protists. The plant-like protists include algae and kelps. There's a number of different groups there. Their classification is based in part upon the different pigments, and so we have different lineages of protists depending on the pigments and how they photosynthesize. And the third group are the fungus-like protists, and again, the slime molds and water molds can be differently classified, but historically they've been put into the Protista. And that will conclude this module.